All right, good morning. If you were looking for the last night, late night shiur, it did not happen, unfortunately, with airline delays and cancellations and food being scarce in the community and all. It was rough nights. Rough nights. But okay, we're back. We're back. We're better than ever, and we're moving along. We are sponsored. Regardless, and last night was sponsored, and the whole month is sponsored by Jeff and Chava Beilawald, Le'ilu Nishmas, Jeff's father, Mr. Roman Wald, Avram ben Shmuel, Zichron Levracha, and grandfather, Mr. Menachem Eisner, Menachem Mendel ben Mordechai, Zichron Levracha, whose your tights were on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. May their neshamas have an aliyah. And Daf Yomi for the month is also sponsored by the new proud parents, Shmuley and Miriam Fuchs. Le'ilu Nishmas, Shmuley's mother, Beila Yenta Bas Chuna, Zichron Levracha, whose your tight is on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. May her neshama have an aliyah. And we are here, and we are on Ayin Ches Amud Aleph, new Mishnah, and ready for everything. Here we go. Hamiluim hayu ba'in kematzah shebatoda. So in the parsha, last week's parsha Tzav, we had the Yemei Miluim, the 7 days before Nisan. They were setting up the Mishkan, and during the setting up of the Mishkan, they brought special korbanos. In those korbanos, they had miluim, and they brought the matzah, the three types. They didn't bring. We had talked about the different types of breads that were, which is really what our topic is. Toda had 4. We had Shavuos, which just had 2 loaves. We had the Nazir, the Ayil Nazir, which had two types of matzah. Now we have another one, the miluim ones, which have 3 types. Right, chalos, urikikin, uravucha. Right, they have the chalos, the rekik, and the revucha. They don't have the chametz. Nazirus, the Nazirus offering, the ayah of the Nazir, haisa ba'a shtei yodos. Only two parts of that. Kematzah shel toda, of the 2 parts of the matzah of the toda, the chalos and the rekikin. Vein ba revucha. They had the chalos and the rekikin. There was no revucha. Nimta asara kabin Yerushalmis, which means that they had 10. They had the 10 kav of the Yerushalmius, because there was the same half a kav for each loaf. And so half a kav times 10 is 5, and then times 2 types is 10. Shein shisha esronos shein shisha esros ve'odyon, which comes out to 6/10 of an ephah, right? Because if they had 10 ephos, 10 tenths of an ephah, right? We had 20 is the total amount that we had for the toda. 10 were for chametz, 10 were for matzah. Out of that 10, we're taking 2/3 of it. So 2/3 is 6 and a bit, is what it says. 6 and a bit, 6 and 2/3 to be precise. Says the Gemara, Minahoni Mili. Where do we know that these karbanos of the Yemei Miluim have the different types of matzah in the toda? Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Chama, Bar Guria, Damar Kol, the pasuk says, Umisal hamatzos asher lifnei Hashem, from the basket of matzahs which were before Hashem, lakach chalas matzah achas. They took a challah matzah achas, v'chalas lechem shemen achas, and a chalas of the bread of oil, and rakik echad. So that's where we've got the 3. We've got, so bishlam achalos, in that pasuk I saw the chalos, fine. Those are, so bishlam achalos are chalos. And the rakik is a rakik, right? That's right there. But shemen, what are these loaves of oil? Shemen maininhu, what are loaves of oil? Lav revucha. Are those not the revucha ones? The revucha ones, they're scalded, those have double the amount of oil of any of the other types. That's why they're called the oil loaves. So therefore, the 3rd type that they included was revucha. Maskif lo Rav Avya. Rav Avya asks the question, Ema anto demishcha. How do you know that? Maybe a loaf of oil means that they took oil and they congealed it together. I don't know, they froze it or whatever. They didn't have refrigerators, whatever. They got it cold and they got a loaf of oil. Maybe that's what they did. Like they brought some, like a stick of margarine or something as a loaf of oil. No. Ella Kedidorish Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda Mishmei de Rabbi Tavla. It's like Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda said the name of Rav Tavla, Zeh Korban Aaron Uvanav Asher Yakrivu LaHashem Biyom Himashachoso. This is the korban that Aaron and his children brought, and they brought close to Hashem on the day that he was anointed.
What did they use for refrigeration back then?
That was I was sort of questioning out loud. Not a lot of refrigeration, and they were in the desert. So I don't know. You'd have to say Hashem would have had to have helped out. It's a fair question, but if you've got oil, and the oil is has to congeal in order to make a loaf, you've got to chill it somehow. But okay, so I don't know. Maybe it gets dark, maybe it's cold at night. I don't know.
That's what you get called.
It can get cold at night, right? So,
Come on.
So malimadnu livanav biyom himashcha. Why does the pasuk have to go back? That it was for the offering for him and his children on the day that he was anointed. Rather, the point is to compare the initiation. That's the word chinuch, right? Initiation of the Kohen, of the regular Kohen, from the that is the day that he enters the service to the day that he was anointed. Mahi mashcho revucha, just like when he is anointed, right? He has to bring a revucha offering that we said was the murbachas. We said the chavitin of the Kohen when he brings on the first day of his service is a revucha. So avchinucho, so too when they were initiating him of a Kohen hedyot also is a revucha. So therefore, that's how we know that the third type of offering was a revucha. Amar Rav Chisda points out Kohen Gadol hamiskarev la'avoda. When a Kohen Gadol comes to do service for the first time, tzarech shtei esronos ha'efa. He's going to bring 2 esronos of flour, right? Of 2 achas lihimashcho. One is going to be his initiation offering to anoint him, and va'achas. That one is lihimashcho. One is for his chavitin, right? That's his regular chavitin offering. Va'achas lechinucho, and the one is for his initiation, right? So he's going to bring 2, because we always said that the Kohen brings one every day, and we always said there was initiation. If he's a Kohen Gadol, his first day, he brings one for his initiation and one for his regular offering. Marba Rav Ashi Amar Shalosh. Marba Rav Ashi says, no, actually 3. Right, you're going to be 3. Ha de avad avoda kishu kohen hedyot, veha and ha de lo avad avoda kishu kohen hedyot. But the difference of opinion is, did he serve before he was a Kohen Gadol? If the first time he ever served as a Kohen was when he was a Kohen Gadol, he has to bring one to initiate himself as a Kohen, then one to initiate himself as a Kohen Gadol, and then one the regular offering for a Kohen Gadol. Right, but if he had served before, then he's already brought one of those offerings when he began to serve, and then he only has to bring the one for becoming the Kohen Gadol and the one for the regular one that he brings. Nazirus haisa b'shtei yodos. Then we say that the Nazirus one comes from 2 parts of those loaves. So what's the source for that? Tana Rabbanan rabbis learned when the pasuk talks about the lachmei toda, it says al zevach todas shlomov, on his shlomim, and we learned from here several times we mentioned this drush that we're going to make a connection between the offerings of the korban toda and the shlomim of the nazir, because it says shlomov, which is the plural. There's more than one shlomim that this applies to. L'rabos shalmei nazir. This pasuk is coming to tell me that some of the rules, not all the rules, obviously I'm bringing all 4, we'll discuss that in a moment, is some of the rules by the shlomim of the nazir have the same rules as the korban toda. Lasos kabin Yerushalmis, in order to be able to establish that the size of the loaf was 5 Yerushalmi kabin. Well, we said laseres kabin Yerushalmis, to the 10 kabin that were between the 2 loaves of bread, and l'revius shemen, and also you're going to bring 1/4 of a log of oil. Now, you needed half a log of oil for the toda, but since we're only bringing half the loaves, so you bring half of that shear. So we're learning that it's the same type of loaves. That's the key. So we're going to bring smaller amounts, proportionate amounts. Half of the amount that we would have brought for a toda, half of the amount. But we're bringing smaller amounts, but it's proportional amounts. Yochol lekol masha amar be'inyan. You might have thought, okay, well, once you're telling me that the toda is like the shlomim, then make it exactly the same as the shlomim. Bring all 3, right? Bring 3 types, right? The chalos, rakikin, and the revucha. Talmud lomar matzos. Therefore, the pasuk says by the nazir, which is in Bamidbar, it says you bring a basket of matzos. Okay, well, my Talmudah, what are you learning from the word matzos? What does that show me? Amar Rav Papa says davar shenemar bo matzos. Right, we're only going to explain that the list in the korban toda, we're only going to bring those breads that are called matzos in the psukim. Lafuki revucha, the revucha, which is also matzah, it's not chometz, but it's not called matzah in the pasuk. Delo nemar bo matzos, it doesn't call it matzos, right? What was it the pasuk said? It said chalos matzah achas, chas lechem shemen achas. The revucha is called lechem shemen. That was it. And rakik echad. The other one's not called matzah, so therefore it's not it's not included. Okay. Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana. In Rabbi Yishmael, we learn in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, they learned matzos klal. It's what we work is like this. There's a klal matzos by Nazir. You bring all matzos. That's the klal. Then it says chalos rikikin. Then it says you're supposed to bring chalos and rikikin. Prat. That's the specific. So it's a klal prat. This is a rule of klal prat, which is ein bechal al mashav prat. You're only going to include that which is in the detail. Chalos rikikin in midi achrini lo. We're going to include the chalos and the rikikin, not anything else. So okay. So by the Nazir, we're only going to bring those two. So we've got it. 4 by the Toda, 3 by the Miluim, 2 by the Nazir. Good. And 1 is the Hashem. Into the Mishnah we go on Ayin Chasamad Beis, Hashochet es HaToda Lifnim, if they brought the sheep for the Korban Toda, and they shecht it inside the Azara, right? It can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the north because it's Kodesh Kalim. So V'lachma chutz l'choma. Now, the bread of the Korban Toda is outside of the wall of Yerushalayim. Remember that the Korban Toda can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. So the activating location, theoretically, should be Yerushalayim. If the bread wasn't inside Yerushalayim that they were bringing with it, lo kadosh halechem, the bread does not get sanctified. It's completely in a different location that doesn't get sanctified. Shachta ad shelo karmu paneha. Similarly, if the bread's in the oven and it has not yet crusted, so it's still dough, it's not bread. So, but tanur, avafilu karmukulon, chutz me'achad mehen, even if all of the chalos are ready, minus one of them, lo kadosh halechem, it does not sanctify. You need to have the bread ready to go when you slaughter it in order for it to become sanctified. So, my chutz l'choma. When it says outside of the wall, I suggested it was outside of the wall of Yerushalayim, but that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chutz L'Chomas Beis Pagi. It's the place called Beis Pagi, and we'll take a look in that Yerushalayim book. But in the Beis Mishnah, basically they were kept adding on the walls of the old city as the expansion of the city grew. But not only that, but for security reasons, they added an extra outer wall to Yerushalayim called this Beis Pagi area, and it's called Beis Pagi because that's the I guess the face muzzle of the horse, right? They put that on and it controls the horse by putting that on. So this was supposed to be directing traffic and control for security to be able to make sure, like an invading army or whatever would have to go through these areas, and that's how they knew where to direct the assault to protect the area. That's Beis Pagi. So that area inside the walls of Beis Pagi, that's inside Yerushalayim. You can eat. It's inside the walls of Yerushalayim. You can eat the Korban Toda anywhere inside of that. So as long as your bread is inside Beis Pagi, you're good. For Reish Lakish says, Chutz l'chomas hazara. Reish Lakish says, no. The walls we're talking about are the walls of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Reish Lakish chutz l'chomas hazara. Ba'inon al b'samach. Reish Lakish's rationale is because it says in the pasuk al zevach toda shlamav. You're supposed to have the bread on the zevach toda. What does that mean? On means nearby. So therefore, if the shlamim itself has to be in the azara, the bread has to be inside the azara. Rabbi Yochanan says, chutz l'chomas Beis Pagi, it can have to be outside the walls of Beis Pagi to be ruined. Ava chutz l'azara kadosh, but if it's outside of the walls of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, it's still holy. V'lo ba'inan al b'samach. He says the al doesn't necessarily mean, al means with, it doesn't necessarily mean physically next to. V'ha ipalgu b'chad zimna. Why does Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish have to argue about the meaning of the word al, whether the meaning of the word al means next to or in the vicinity of? They already argued about this in another place. Ditznan, we learn a Mishnah. Love this. Hashochet es ha-Pesach al ha-Chometz. Erev Pesach, you still have Chometz around, and you're shecht your Korban Pesach, and you've got Chometz there. Over below Saseh.
Remember me to have a little snack later on.
Okay, good, yeah.
Don't become a rabbi.
I won't. It's not like it's on video and he's going to watch it later. So, you're in violation of maybe I am the rabbi. So, over below saseh. You're in violation of a lo saseh because the pasuk says, lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. You're not supposed to slaughter on the chametz my offering. Rabbi Yehuda says, af hatamid. This is also the afternoon korban in this afternoon, right? We're bringing a korban in the afternoon of the Beis HaMikdash. If you slaughter that one, it also says zivchi, so it could be by plural, my offerings. So even that one, if I bring my korban tamid, and I've got chametz there. So it could be not just the Pesach I'm in violation if I've got chametz on Erev Pesach in the afternoon, but even my korban tamid. The Amar Reish Lakish says, Li'olam eino chayav ad sheyehei o l'shochet o zorek o le'echad mibnei chabura imo ba'azara. Only if either the guy who's slaughtering it, the guy who's throwing the blood, one of the people who was part of that korban in the courtyard with his chametz, right? Because that's what it means. Al dam zivchi, according to Reish Lakish, means it's got to be there in the vicinity. The chametz is in his house at home, doesn't bother us, right? Al means you brought it with you. You had your candy bar in your pocket. Rabbi Yochanan,
bad example. Because of course, look at candy bar.
that's true, and also even in probably kitnios, I was thinking you got to have a Kit Kat or something, right?
Nutty bar for Spartan.
Rabbi Yochanan says, Afal pi she'ein imo bazar. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even if the chametz is not with you. Al doesn't mean in the vicinity literally. It means while you have in your possession chametz, it's going to be a problem. And sricha. So I need to have this argument multiple times. Why? Because itmar behahi. If you had told me that this issue was only an issue of chametz, behi kama Rabbi Yochanan dekol hecha deisei beisurakai, I might say that's what Rabbi Yochanan would say. That location doesn't matter. Because wherever it is, right, you've got chametz. So you are a person who is an owner of chametz, and therefore you are in violation. Avalinian mikdash lechem, but as far as sanctifying the bread, he might agree with Reish Lakish that it has to be de'ise bifnim if it's there inside the azara when you're offering the korban. So then kadosh it becomes sanctified ibroi, but if it's outside lo kadosh, then it wouldn't be. V'yit marbaha, and if you had told me that this was the situation about the korban toda, b'ha kama Reish Lakish, I might think that this is the circumstance where Reish Lakish says that it needs to be nearby, but by the chametz, Rabbi Yochanan, he might agree with Rabbi Yochanan, it doesn't need to be nearby, so tzricha. So I need it in both cases because it's a little bit of a surprise that they are consistent in their opinions regardless. Tanya kavase Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan's view that it doesn't literally have to be there. Hashochet es hatoda lifnim v'lachma chutz lechomas beis pagi. If you slaughter the korban toda inside the azara, and the bread is outside, and this brisa actually specifies outside what? Outside the chomas beis pagi, outside the wall of beis pagi, lo kadosh alechem, then it doesn't sanctify. Mishnah said, shchata ad shelo karmu baneha, if you slaughter the offering, and the bread is not yet finished baking, so but tanur in the oven. So minoni mili, how do I know that this is the case? The Tanur Rabbanan rabbis learned in the pasuk says, "Al chalos lechem chametz yakriv korbano al zevach." Right on the chalos lechem chametz, you should bring the korban on the offering. Malami chein halechem kadosh ela im kain karmu paneha batanur.
That's the best challah.
Right, it's got to be.
And it's not big. It's doughy challah. It's the best.
Well, yeah, but you at least need the outside to be a little bit crusted. Otherwise, it's just plain dough, and that's no good. Yakriv korbano al zevach. It says you should bring the korban on the offering. Right? That means that the bread is not sanctified until you slaughter the offering. Zevach todas lo kadosh alechem. The other thing it says is zevach todas has to be a zevach of the toda. Also tells us that if you slaughter the offering of the toda, not l'shem the korban toda, the bread does not get sanctified. We said the offering can be kosher, but it's not going to satisfy his obligation, and the bread is not sanctified, so he's going to offer, what is he going to do? He's just going to offer it up and continue bringing it as a shlamim. He's going to have to go home and get another animal, or go out and buy another one, and then bring it again. Tana Rabbanan, a rabbi's learn. Yotzin b'matzah no. On Pesach night, right? If you've got matzah that's not completely cooked, right? You've got it's crusted, but it's not completely cooked through. So then it is your yotze, which is very interesting because people are very makbid on their matzah, right? Yeah. People take a look at their matzahs and they see any bubbles or folds or whatever. We get rid of those because we don't want to make it like doughy on the inside. So I find that very interesting. This Gemara clearly states, Brisa says, right? You are yotze eating matzah. Not only is it not chametz, but you're yotze eating matzah with a not completely finished bread. Okay. We're machmir.
Since the Gemara said, why do we?
We always, because we're always careful. We're extra careful, right? The answer is we don't need to be. If you didn't, and if you find you go over to somebody's house and you look at their matzahs and they look up the light and you see a little fold, don't worry so much. But right, this is but nevertheless, right? This is. you're yotze even for matzah.
We're being too softy towards the matzah.
We're being too crunchy, right? Ubematzah hasuya beilfas, and also you could be yotze with matzah that is baked in a ilfas, which is a pot, right? So I guess a pot baked matzah or something.
How do you bake matzah in a pot?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess they remember that their ovens were conical shaped or whatever. I guess theoretically, if you put more on and you stuck it on the inside, I doubt with water or anything. It's just like it's baked in.
I mean, they're like a teepee,
right? But it's not the normal way of baking, and therefore it is a bit of a chiddush, right? That's the idea of it. It's unusual, right? So you're sticking it in there, okay? But in any event, my matzah no. What is matzah no? What is not completely cooked? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, kol shepursa vein chutin nimshachin himena. Anything which is baked enough that if you break it, there are no lines of dough connecting them. Right? It's not like that's soft and moist and chewy. Right? It cracks. Right? Then it's done. Okay, that's no. That's okay. Right? If you break it open and the dough is still doughy inside, that's not okay. Amar Rava v'chein le'inyan lachmei toda. Such is the same rule as far as the toda is concerned. So pshita, I mean, that seems clear. Matzah and Pesach and matzah and toda have the same rules. Hacha lechem ksiv. Here it says lechem. Hacha lechem ksiv, and by lechem of matzah it says lechem oni, and al chalos lechem chametz. So therefore the rules are the same. Ma'udatema, what would you have thought? Echad amar rachmana shelo yitol porus v'hakaman de prisa damya. So the pasuk says by the toda, right? It says that you have to have one of them, and you're not allowed to take a piece. And this challah, which is not completely baked all the way, keman de prisa damya, you might think that it's as though it is cut up, right? Because it will. I guess it'll easily break up by itself. Kamash malon, that it is fine, right? It's baked enough. Itmar. Okay, so it has been said in the Beis Medrash, Toda sheshchata al shmonim chalos. With this we discussed in the past and we said, let's say you have a Toda and somebody says, I've got 80 chalos here. He's only supposed to have 40, right? And he says, I've got 80 and I'm going to slaughter my korban Toda. What happens to the 80 loaves? So Chizkiah says, Kadshu arboim mitoch shmonim. Chizkiah says 40 of the 80 are sanctified. Of course, we're not going to know necessarily which ones. We're going to treat them all and eat them all. But 40 of them 80 are, and you're good. Rabbi Yochanan Amar lo kadshu arboim mitoch shmonim. Rabbi Yochanan says nothing. No, does not work. The chalos are not sanctified at all because you can't sanctify 80. So if you tried to sanctify 80, you have sanctified none. Amar Reb Zera says, Hakol modim, everyone, both Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan would agree, Heicha de Amar li kadshu arboim mitoch shmonim kadshu. If the person had said, here, I've got 80 loaves, 40 of these are going to be my, that would be fine. He wouldn't have specified. You'd have to not know, and you'd have to eat all 80, but, burn them if they were left over, but that would work, because you're not doing anything more than you normally do. This is supposed to be 40. It's sanctified 40. Even Rabbi Yochanan would agree that's fine. Al yikdeshu arboim ela imkein yikdeshu shmonim lo kadshu. The other thing they agree with is that if he specified none of these are sanctified unless all of them are sanctified, that's for sure not true. Even Chizkiah says that does not work. What is their argument? Ki pligi bestama. The argument is he just had an 80 and he said nothing. So, Mar Savar Lachrayus Kamechavein, one said that the whole reason why he brought 80 is that he wanted to make sure that he had all of them. What happens if some get lost? He was nervous. So he brought 80 and his intention was to sanctify those other ones in order to fill in the blanks. Mar Savar LeKorban Goldo Kamechavein. The other one says, no, he intended to bring a huge korban. And as we said, that does not work. Rabbi Yochanan says, right, according to Chizkiah, says it works. You sanctified 40. He just brought extras just in case he needed extras. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, he intended to bring all 80, and that's not going to work. Abaye says,
how did he bring all 80 by himself? Did he need?
He probably brought it with help, right? He had some schleppers, right? You're right.
But he probably paid a huge sum to the schleppers.
I don't know what minimum wage was. Doesn't say. Bikli shares mikadjin shalomi das kamifligi. He says, I'll tell you what really the argument is about right? Chizki and Rabbi Yochanan agree that his intent is for one large offering, right? That's what's happening. He brought 80, he thinks, I got lots of guests coming to this feast, I'm bringing 80 loaves. And he thought he's going to sanctify all 80, right? But here's the argument. He puts it in a kli shares. The question is, how does the kli shares work? Does the kli shares do what he's thinking? Or does the kli shares work automatically? That's the question. Mar savar kli shares mekachin shelo midas. One says the kli shares knows what to work, right? Automatically. So therefore, if you put 80 into the kli shares and you have in mind you're going to do all 80, it doesn't matter. The kli shares is going to sanctify 40 because that's all the kli shares does. And so your intent is irrelevant. Umar savar kli shares in mekachin shelo midas. The other one says, no, the kli shares doesn't work without the intent of the owner. Therefore, if the owner has bad intent, he actually ruins the action of the kli shares, and he doesn't sanctify. So therefore, by bringing 80, he sanctifies none. Rav Papa, he has another interpretation of Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan's argument. Rav Papa Amar, Dekuli Amar kli shares mekachin shelo midas. He says, now everyone agrees that kli shares works automatically. V'hacha besakin kamiflagi. Here the argument is, though, what's the utensil that is doing the sanctifying? It's not a big bowl that everything is in. The sanctification is the knife by which he is slaughtering the korban, by he slaughters with the korban. So mar savar sakin mekadeshes kekli shares. One says the knife works like any other kli shares. So therefore, just like a kli shares sanctifies without any knowledge, as soon as whoever is doing the shechita does the shechita, 40 loaves are sanctified automatically. Who cares what he's thinking? Umar savar, the other one says, sakin kaven de leis leitoch eina mekadeshes kekli shares. The other one says a knife isn't like a big bowl. The bowl is a container, holds everything in it. The knife is not working like other containers in the Beis Hamikdash. Therefore, the knife needs intent, and therefore, whatever his intent was, all 80 is going to ruin the intent. Ve'ika de Amri, and there are those who learn Rav Papa the other way. Rav Papa Amar de Kuliyama Kli Shares Ein Mekadshin Elamidas. That according to Rav Papa, everyone would agree that the utensil would not sanctify without his knowledge. But v'hacha besakin, when it comes to a knife, kamiflagi, they will argue. Mar savar sakin alima mikli shares. One holds that the knife is actually a stronger way to sanctify, right? De'afagav deleis leitoch mikadsha. Because even though it's not a container like all of the other kli shares, it nevertheless sanctifies. Therefore, perhaps it sanctifies the 40 loaves despite the fact that you have the wrong intent. Mar savar sakin lo almalei mikli shares. The other one says, no, a knife works like any other utensil. It only sanctifies what is intended, and therefore 40 are sanctified and the others are not, against the will of the owner. Next Mishnah. Shchata chutz lizmana v'chutz l'mkom. Our old friend Pigel, right? If you slaughter this korban, and you have in mind to consume it outside the right time or outside of the right place, kadosh halechem. What happens to the bread? The bread is sanctified. And then the bread becomes pigel, right? If you eat it, you're in violation of pigel. Or, right, if it's outside the right time, it's pigel. Outside the right place, it's just a lo saseh, as we said before. Shchata v'nimtzeis treifa. Let's say you slaughter the animal, and the animal is found to be a treifa. So lo kadosh halechem. Then the bread is not kodesh. Why? As we'll discuss in a moment, right? Because we're going to see potential rationales why this will be without the Gemara we'll discuss. Either you could look at it as, well, the problem with the animal existed before you did the slaughtering. So therefore, this was essentially a problem beforehand. So therefore, there was never a moment where you slaughtered and the bread became sanctified because you had a problematic animal. You just didn't know it, right? Another issue, as we're going to discuss, is when you're going to need to slaughter this animal, the animal has to obtain some level of sanctification. A treifa animal has no level of sanctification. Sometimes we have a korban that you slaughter and the animal becomes puzzle. And it becomes puzzle to a degree that if you accidentally brought it onto the mizbeach, it doesn't come down, which we discussed. So if it has that level of sanctity, maybe the bread can become sanctified. A is completely unsanctified. So therefore, if it goes up on the Mizbeach, it does come down. Therefore, the bread is not sanctified. Shchata v'nimtzeis balas mum. If you slaughter the animal and and you realize afterwards it has a blemish. So Rabbi Eliezer argues, and he says Kiddush, the bread is sanctified, and the Chachamim lo Kiddush, and the Chachamim say it is not sanctified. We'll see what the argument is about in the Gemara. Shchata shelo lishma. Let's say the person sanctifies it, and he says it's not supposed to be, he didn't think it's a toda, he just decided it's going to be a shlamim or some other kind of a thing. V'chein el hamiluim, and similarly, he sanctifies the ram of the miluim, where he sanctifies it, past tense, obviously this was not practical nowadays, we don't have a el miluim, but when they did it. V'chein shnei kivsei atzeres, so too the sheep of the 2 loaves of bread for Shavuos, sheshchatan shelo lishman, and you slaughter not for the sake of the right offering, lo kadash alechem, the bread that goes with it is not sanctified either, because you didn't bring that actual korban which required the bread.
Okay. Like a chatas has to be lishma.
A toda does not know, because a chatas shelo lishma, the korban is puzzle. Here the korban can still be brought, but it's not going to be brought as a toda. It's going to be just brought as a regular shlamim without the bread. Okay, good point. Says the Gemara, Masnisin Mani, whose opinion is our Mishnah? Rabbi Meir, our Mishnah is following Rabbi Meir's viewpoint, as we'll see. Titania, we learn in a brisa. Zeh HaKlal, here's the rule. Kol shepisulo kodem shchita lo kadash alechem. If this, we said in the Mishnah, if the invalidation of the animal is before the shchita, then it's already considered invalid. So therefore, when you slaughter the animal, the bread does not become sanctified. You need a kosher shlita in order to sanctify the bread. If something happens to the animal afterwards, then the bread is still kodesh, right? But if something happened to the animal before, the bread never gets sanctified. Pisulo achar shchita kodesh lechem. If the animal becomes invalidated after shchita, then the bread is sanctified. So, shchata chutz lizmana. So, let's say he slaughters the animal and he has in mind that he's going to eat it outside the right time, chutz lemekom, or outside the right place, kadash halechem. Then the bread does get sanctified. The shchita is a kosher shchita. The invalidation comes from the intent during the shchita, and therefore, from then forward, the bread is sanctified. It just becomes usher to eat. Shchata v'nimtzeis treifa, if you shecht it and it turns out it's treifa, lo kadash halechem, that doesn't sanctify, because the animal was a treifa before you got started. Ayin tes amud aleph. Shchata v'nimtzeis balas mum, if you shecht it and it turns out to be a bal mum, so then Rabbi Eliezer Amar Kadash, Rabbi Eliezer says it is holy, it is sanctified, and Rabbi Yoshua Amar Lo Kadash, Rabbi Yoshua says it is not. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's how Rabbi Meir learns Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Okay? Because they're arguing about whether we'll see whether they're going to discuss why would there be an argument. Rabbi Meir should say, well, was the blemish beforehand? Then it's not good. If the blemish is after, then it is good. So we'll see. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo nechluku Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yeshua al sheshchata v'nimtzeis treifa shelo kadash. He says, okay, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, they do not argue that if you slaughter the animal and it turns out that you find an internal injury that makes the animal a treifa, that the bread is not sanctified. That I agree. Al chutz lizmano, and not only that, he says, al chutz lizmano shekadash. I also agree that they don't argue that if you have in mind that you're going to make it pigul outside of the right time, that it does in fact work, because the pigul, we said, was a kosher, otherwise kosher, and it creates the prohibition of pigul on the bread. It's sanctified. Al balmum shelo kadash. But he says, but here's where I disagree with you. He says, I don't think that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua disagree about the balmum. If it has a blemish, he says if it has a blemish, it does not sanctify. So what is the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua about? He says, chutz l'mekomo. If the person has intent to do it outside of the right to eat this outside of place, he goes, I'm going to take this korban, I'm going home, I'm going to eat it in my house in Tel Aviv. So then that is an invalidating thought, and that's the argument. Rabbi Eliezer Amar Kadash, Rabbi Yeshua Amar Lo Kadash. That's where Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua disagree. So again, Rabbi Meir thinks the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua is a circumstance of the balmum, and Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's the circumstance of shechting it chutz l'mekomo. So, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, So now we're going to explain, right? Rabbi Yehuda is going to explain. What is Rabbi Eliezer saying? Why does he say that? Ho'il chutz lizmano pasul. He says, look, if I have in mind the wrong time, that's going to be pasul. Chutz lemekomo pasul. So therefore, outside the right location is also pasul. After all, they have the similar rules. Ma chutz lizmano kadash. Just like it is outside of the right time, it sanctifies the bread. Av chutz lemekomo, outside the right place, also Kadash is going to sanctify the bread. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, to which Rabbi Yeshua says, Ho v'chutz l'mekomo pasol, ba'al mum pasol. He says, no. I'll tell you, I'm not going to compare it to the pigel. I'm going to compare it to the animal that has a mum. And he says, just like if it outside of the right location, it's pasol, so too if it has a mum, is also pasol. Ma ba'al mum lo kadash, and we had agreed that just as a animal with a mum is not sanctified, af chutz l'mekomo lo kodesh, also if it's outside of the right location, it is also not kodesh. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer, so Rabbi Eliezer says, ani demisihu lechutz lizmano. So what? We're arguing about which is the the closer prohibition, right? We're trying to figure out, does the bread follow the rules of pigel? What if I do it outside of the right location? Does that follow the rules of pigel or the rules of a ba'al mum? That's what our argument is about. So, I'm comparing it to the pigel, to the outside the right time. You're comparing it to an animal with a blemish. Nira lemidama, let's take a look. Which is the outside of the right location? Which is the prohibition there more similar to? Im doma l'chutz lizmano, if it's going to be more comparable to the pigel, to the outside of the right time, so nidunenu michutz lizmano. So then let's say it does become sanctified, just like if I slaughtered it with in mind outside of the right time. Vim doma lebal mum, but if I can compare it and make it close to the blemished animal, nidonenu mi bal mum, so then you're right. Then I'll agree with you and I'll say that it's like a bal mum, just as the bal mum was not sanctified, so too, this outside of the right location won't be sanctified. So Hischel Rabbi Eliezer ladun. So Rabbi Eliezer starts rolling up his sleeves and he gets down to business. Here's how this works. Donin pasol machshava, pasol mi pasol machshava. He says, I'll tell you why thinking about it in the wrong place is the same thing as thinking about it in the wrong time, because they're both thinking. That's the big thing. Vein don psul machshava, psul guf, which is not the same thing as a ba'al mum. A ba'al mum is not a thinking thing, it's a blemish on the animal. So he says, so that's why I'm telling you it's like the blemish in thinking, and therefore the bread is sanctified. Hischel Rabbi Yeshua, so Rabbi Yeshua rolls up his sleeves and he says, let's take a look. Done in psul she'ein bo kares, so psul she'ein bo kares, mi psul she'ein bo kares. He says, yeah, but pigel, if you eat pigel, you get kares. If you eat this meat when you have the wrong place in mind, you don't get kares for that. So too, if you eat a pasol korban that has a mum on it, you don't get kares for that. So therefore, let's compare the ones that don't get kares. Don't use pigel, she'psul she'yesh bo kares. That is a problem that if you eat that one, you get kares. Right? The od, and I'll tell you furthermore, nidunenu shelo lishmo, mi shelo lishmo, I should take a look and I should compare the case of the shelo lishmo. I should compare the case of the animal, which is if I slaughter my korban toda with the wrong intent. I say this korban toda, and the guy comes and says it's just a regular shlomim. Well, what happens then? That is an invalidation of the korban, which satisfies both things. It's not it's a thought of era, because you think that it's not going to be a toda, and there's no kares if you do that. So then, in that circumstance, what happens to the bread? The Mishnah said it's not sanctified. V'shalsak Rabbi Eliezer, so Rabbi Eliezer, nothing to say. That's a great point, right? The ideal comparison is shchita that is shechting shelo lishma, and that does not sanctify the bread. So Rabbi Eliezer had nothing to answer. Okay, that's the back and forth of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Meir says that's not the argument between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer at all. Maishna shchata v'nimtzeis treifa. What he says, look, their argument is about, they never argued, so according to him, he says, they never argued about chutz l'mekomo, that it was sanctified. The argument that they had was about the balmum, whether or not that's sanctified. He says, why does it make a difference? If you slaughter an animal and it turns out that it's a treifa, dave psulo kodem shchita, since the psul is before the shchita, why would it make any difference? If you shecht it and you find that it has a mum on it, why is that not considered to be a invalidation before the shechita? Right? It should be ruined. So the answer is bedukin sheba'ayin. We're not talking about a major blemish. We're not talking like it's missing a foot or something. We're talking about it has a cataract in the eye. That's a small problem.
Or a punctured lung could also be.
Not a punctured lung, because that would be a more severe one. That's a treifa. A treifa would not sanctify it. A good example of a treifa is a punctured lung. That's not a mum. That's a treifa that would not sanctify the bread, right? This is a mum, and it has to be so minor, V'aliba de Rabbi Akiva, that according to Rabbi Akiva, de Amar im alu lo yerdu, he says this is such a minor invalidation that if you slaughtered it and it turned out that was a mum, that if you brought this, it accidentally brought these pieces up onto the mizbech, you would not take them down, which means that they've got some kind of sanctification. Well, if they've got some kind of sanctification, that's why there's an argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, whether that is enough to sanctify the bread of the Todah together with it. Beduk, V'idach, right? Now, Rabbi Yehuda, he says, no. Ki Amar Rabbi Akiva im alulu yerdu bipsula dugufei aval lekadushe lechem lo. He says, Rabbi Yehuda, he says, no. This argument between this point that Rabbi Akiva makes, that can't be what Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer are arguing about, because that's only an issue of whether the korban itself has an amount of sanctity. But that amount of sanctity is not enough to transfer over to the bread. That for sure isn't the case. That's what Rabbi Yehuda will say. Okay. So now, we're going to now talk. Now that we finished that brisa, which explains the whole back and forth between Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah again followed Rabbi Meir's opinion that the argument between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer was talking about the animal with a mum, right? Whereas Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree that that's their argument, but okay. But our Mishnah does agree that way. Itmar said in the base medrash, chatos sheshchata chutz lizmana. If you have a chatos, a korban chatos, and you slaughter it with pigul intent outside of the right time, im also lo tered, if it is brought up on the mizbeach, don't bring it down. Don't take it down. Right? This is an example of an olo lo tered. Chutz lemekoma, if you slaughter it for the intent of outside the right place. So Rava Amar tered. Rava says that's not sanctified enough. Take that animal down. Rabba Amar lo tered. Rabba says no, it's sanctified enough. Don't take it down. Rava, why does Rava say that? Ki Rabbi Yeshua. He holds like Rabbi Yeshua. Why? Because Rabbi Yeshua, in this argument that Rabbi Yehuda had meant, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right? He had this back and forth between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. He had held that Rabbi Yeshua holds that he's going to compare this animal that was slaughtered with the intent outside the right place to a balmum. And a balmum, the rule is that if it goes up, you take it down, right? Rabba, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabba holds like Rabbi Eliezer. He says that we're going to compare it to the pigul offering. And the pigul one, we just said, if it goes up, it does not come down. The hadar be Rabba legabe de Rava. And then in the end, Rabba changed his mind and agreed with Rava. Why? The hadar be Rabbi Eliezer legabe Rabbi Yeshua. Just like Rabbi Eliezer changed his mind in the back and forth brisa, we had said that Rabbi Eliezer had nothing to answer when Rabbi Yehoshua pointed out to him that you're going to compare the balmum. You're going to compare the chutz l'mekomo to the shalol lishmo. And the shalol lishmo, for sure, if it goes up, it does not come down. It's actually almost a valid offering. So that for sure. So therefore, he takes it back. Ve'ika de Amri, and some said, Afagav de Hadar be Rabbi Eliezer legabe Yeshua, that actually, even though Rabbi Eliezer agreed with Rabbi Yeshua, Rabba legabe de Rava lo Hadar be, Rabba still did not agree with Rava. And why? Because Hasam hu de Ka'amar le nidunenu shalol lishmo. Right? He's mi shalol lishmo. There, the rationale was we're going to compare the offering to the shalol lishmo. We're going to compare the shalom limkomo, having in mind not in the right place, to the having in mind shalol lishma. And we said that since that's not going to be kares, and that's not there, the bread is not sanctified, so he wanted to learn from there. But here, you can't compare. Dainos lo lay mishalo lishmo. If you're going to compare it shlo lishmo, im also lo tered. For sure, if it goes up, it would not come down, right? Shlo lishma, and therefore the offering would, in fact, be Rava's answer tered. It should come down. It's not sanctified. It would not be. You can't say that in the case of the bread, it's not sanctified. So therefore, here, if it comes up, because there. If it's where he's comparing it to the shul lishmo. The shul lishmo, after all, goes up. It does not come down. So therefore, you can't compare. Okay. The Mishnah said, shchata shelo lishma. If you slaughter it without the right intention, so then the bread does not get sanctified. Amar Rav Papa Rava says, shavak tana didan el nazir deshchiach v'nakit el hamiluim. Why is it that if you look in the Mishnah specifies and says the korban toda and the yemei miluim, if you shecht it shelo lishma, they're not sanctified. What about the El Nazir? Well, the bread of the Nazirs has the same rule. Why does the Mishnah discuss the miluim, which doesn't exist anymore, and not mention the Nazir korban, which we use? So the answer is Tana Didan Iker Milsa Nakat. The answer is because if you look at the psukim, right? The psukim are talking about the El Miluim, and it's talking about, which is the first korban ever that they brought bread with, and the Nazir one is only learned as a derivative of the korban toda, so therefore it gets left out, so that's why they included that one. But it's not to exclude it for any practical reason. Practically speaking, the Nazir one has the same rules. Says the next Mishnah, Hanesachim shekadju b'kli, right? If you have sanctified, you take the wine that's for the nesachim and you put it into the utensil. V'nimtza zevach pasel, and now it turns out that the offering that's coming together with this wine is now invalid. Im yesh zevach acher, if you've got another offering to put with it, yakrivu imo. Just bring that wine and put it over to there, because it's not like the bread. The bread became sanctified through the slaughtering of this offering. Those two are now linked together. Whereas by the wine, just pouring into the utensil makes it sanctified. It can go with this offering. This offering is invalid. Just bring it to another offering. V'im lanu. Now though, however, if it became sanctified in the utensil, if it becomes nighttime and you haven't consumed it or brought it with another offering, yipaslu belina. It becomes invalid at night. Right? Just like any other offering, it's now sanctified. Comes nighttime, this wine can no longer be used. Amar Zeiri. Zeiri says, Eina nesachim miskanchin ella b'shchitas hazevach. Zeiri says, the wine becomes sanctified with the slaughtering of the korban. My time, why? Amar kra zevach unesachim. It says, combines them together, the offering and the wine. Yeah, but the Mishnah says, Tanan, our Mishnah says, Hanesachim shekadju b'kli v'nim tzevach pasol im yesh zevach acher yikruvu imo v'im lanu yivsabu belino. It says that once you put it in the utensil, it becomes sanctified, and therefore you can move it over to another korban. And if it becomes sanctified over and it hits overnight, then it becomes invalidated. It seems like the utensil sanctifies it, not the slaughtering of an animal. My lav. De ipsol b'shchita. Isn't the circumstance here, right, that the shchita became invalid, and nevertheless, the offering is still valid because it was in the utensil? So the answer is lo. De ipsol b'zrika. What happened is, it became sanctified already in the utensil during the shchita. And now, the animal becomes invalid as a problem or as a result when you're throwing it, right? But it became sanctified through the shchita. Okay, so now, therefore, that's why it becomes invalid at night. So it goes into the utensil, then you slaughter the animal, that's when it becomes sanctified. Keman, who is that opinion like? Right, that the nesachim becomes sanctified by the shchita. That's Kerebi. That's like Rebbe said, Da'amar shnei dvarim hamatirin ma'alin zeh below zeh. Right? He said that if I've got two things that permit the meat to be consumed, right? Shchita and zrika. So then they sanctify, either one of those sanctifies the meat, right? Once I do shchita or I do the zrika, that's going to sanctify it. And that is going to be the case also as far as the nesachim is concerned as well. No, afilu tema Rabbi Elazar ber Rabbi Shimon. No, we might even say that Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, who is the distinguishing opinion, he says that you have to, things can only become sanctified with shchita and zrika together, because hacha b'mayaskina, what are we dealing here? Kegon shekibel daman bakos v'nishbach, right? He says that, for example, he's talking about a circumstance where you caught the blood of an animal after the shchita in a cup, and then it falls on the ground, right? And so that circumstance, there's no zrika, so therefore it's not sanctified, and therefore the meat cannot be consumed. For Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon savar lo kavase da'avuha, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon is holding like his father, that he says, Kol ha'omed lizarek kezorek dami, anything which could have been thrown once it's already caught in the utensil. So then it says, though it is thrown already, and therefore, even though you have not thrown and the blood is not going to be valid, the wine in the utensil became sanctified as soon as the shechita took place, because the blood was ready to be thrown, and now the wine in the utensil becomes sanctified. So that Rabbi Eliezer is going to agree, right, that it's that. Okay, good. So fine. That's only if the zrika was, if there was a zrika and the zrika was puzzle, that's going to make it. That's going to make it so that the shechita is not going to be enough to sanctify it. But when you have it was caught in a kosher utensil, that it becomes sanctified, and the wine becomes sanctified, and everyone agrees to that. Amar Mar. So now it says in the Mishnah, Im yesh zevach acher yikruvu imo. Okay, once the first offering becomes invalid, get another offering, and then get that going. V'ha Rabbi Amar Rabbi Chisda. Rabbi Chisda says, Shemen sheifrishu l'shum mincha. If I take oil and I say this oil is for this korban mincha, pasul l'shum mincha cheres, and I cannot take this oil and then go to a different one. I can't switch it over. How can I then? Why am I allowed to take wine from this offering and move it over to this one? So Rabbi Yanai. So Rabbi Yanai says, Leiv based in masna alehem. The answer is because based in makes the declaration on this. Im hutzrechu, hutzrechu. Right? If it's necessary, if this wine, they say, the sanctification is dependent. If they need the wine for this offering, then great. But if not, Yehula zevach acher, then it should be also valid for another offering. Well, ihachi, if that's true, shemen nami, why don't they make the same rule for the oil? And then the oil becomes transferable from one mincha to another. So shemen gufa de mincha, you can't do that, because shemen is part of the mincha. What is the mincha? The mincha is the flour and the oil and the frankincense. That's the mincha. But the korban, the animal korban, is the animal. The wine is just a secondary mitzvah to bring together with the animal. V'lisnu alehen dimnipku l'chulin. So okay, so then why are the chachamim making it this way? That if the wine isn't used for this korban, you make it for this korban. They make it, if you use it for this korban, great. If not, then it's chulin, and you can use it for whatever you want. So the answer is gzera shemer yomru motian mikli shares l'chol. The answer is we don't want to do that, because somebody's going to take a look and see what they're doing and think that you poured and you sanctified something into your utensil, and then you can just take it out and use it for whatever you want. And that's not true. So hashtanami, still, what are people going to see now? People are going to see that you used it for this one, it became invalid. They might think that if I separated the wine for this offering, I could just take it and move it over to the other offering. And the answer is you can't do that unless the first offering comes puzzle. So Hasni Matisya ben Yehuda. So, but didn't we learn that Matisya ben Yehuda says, Kegon shaya zevach zavuach ba'osa shah. Right? What happens is that the offering was already slaughtered at that time. So therefore, when the first one became already invalid, the second was already slaughtered. So that people are going to say, they're not going to realize that utensil, that wine wasn't for the second one already. They might have thought that was what it was for. They're not going to see that you had this one, it became invalid, and then you went, oh, there's a living animal, let's go bring it over there. That you can't do. But this one was already slaughtered, so therefore that's why you can transfer it from one to the other. What would be the rule if it wasn't already slaughtered? Nifso belina. Then it's going to become invalid by leaving it overnight. Adatani Seifa, the Mishnah says, Imlanu yifsalu belina. If it does stay overnight, then it becomes invalid. Liflug v'lisnei v'dida. Why does it have to say that? Why doesn't the Mishnah specify and teach us this rule and explain it outright? Bamedvar mamurim, what are we talking about? If they already had another animal to use it on, then it works. But if not, it's not, and then you're going to have to let it ruin. That is what it's saying. Bamedvar mamurim, when is it talking about? When there was an alternate offering to use it on. If you didn't have one, so then nasa kamish nifsul belina upsu, and then it would be like you left it over, and it would be puzzled. We have 1 minute. We'll go to Umi Islay the Rabbi Shimon. Does Rabbi Shimon say Leiv based in Masna Aleim? Does Rabbi Shimon hold that based in makes these kinds of conditions? Vaha Amarav Idi Bar Abin Rav Idi Bar Abin say Amarav Amram Nir Ramam Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Rabbi Yochanan Tamidim Shel Hutzur Chul Tzibur. If I've got a korban tamid that was not wound up not being needed, right? It's Rosh Chodesh, and I've got these extra tamidim. What do I do with them? I've got these 4 left over, and I've got to use the new money from the new offerings. What do I do with the extra ones? L'div Rabbi Shimon ein niftin tamimim. According to Rabbi Shimon, you cannot redeem them while they're tamim. They have no blemishes. L'div Chacham niftin tamimim. The Chacham say you can. And that's because the Chacham say they made a condition. If you didn't need it, you didn't need it. According to Rabbi Shimon, there's no conditions. Shani Hasam, that's different. De'i lehu takanta beriya. Dislu takanta beriya. The answer is Rabbi Shimon says there no, because you have a solution. Just let it go out to pasture, get a blemish, and then you can redeem it. Why would you have a beis din make a condition that is unnecessary? But when the beis din makes a condition that is necessary, there's nothing you can do with the wine, so they do make conditions, and he allows those conditions. Okay, we'll stop there. I test Amud Beis.
Perfect. That's the Mishnah. Beautiful. Shkoyah.